Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Jennifer Surtees, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Midshipman Cassidy Fox. Today we remember the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, which took place 75 years ago today, on the 9th of August 1945. 3 days after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, a second bombing mission took place, with Kokura as the primary target. A combination of delays, drifting smoke over Kokura, and low fuel led to the bombing of the mission's secondary target, the city of Nagasaki. Although the bomb was more powerful than the one used on Hiroshima, its effects were confined by hillsides to the narrow Urakami Valley. At least 35,000 to 40,000 people were killed and 60,000 others injured. In the days and months following the explosion, large numbers of people continued to die from the effects of burns, radiation sickness, and other injuries compounded by illness and malnutrition. Most of the dead were civilians. Following the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, American President Harry Truman issued a statement, part of which stated, "The British, Chinese, and United States governments have given the Japanese people adequate warning of what is in store for them. We have laid down the general terms on which they can surrender. Our warning went unheeded, our terms were rejected. Since then, the Japanese have seen what our atomic bomb can do. They can foresee what it will do in the future. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war. Only a Japanese surrender will stop us." On the 15th of August, 6 days after the Soviet Union's declaration of war and the bombing of Nagasaki, Japanese Emperor Hirohito announced the surrender of Imperial Japan. This evening, we warmly welcome the family of Sergeant Leopold Maynard, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, of beauty rich and rare. In history's page let every state advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Sergeant Leopold Maynard. Leopold Maynard was born in April 1883 near the town of Scone, New South Wales. His family later moved to Singleton, where he attended Singleton Public School. Well known as an avid footballer and cricketer, after leaving school, he worked as a grocer. Maynard enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force in March 1915. He joined the 17th Australian Infantry Battalion, which was being formed at Liverpool, outside Sydney. After preliminary training in Australia, the battalion sailed for Egypt in May. In June and July, Maynard and the 17th Battalion trained at the Australian Army camp in Egypt before being deployed on the Gallipoli Peninsula in August. For most of its time on Gallipoli, the battalion held a defensive position at Quinn's Post. Showing promise as a soldier, Maynard was promoted to Lance Corporal soon after his arrival at the front. In December, the Allied forces withdrew from the peninsula and the men of the 17th Battalion returned to Egypt. Undertaking more training in the early months of 1916, Maynard was promoted to the rank of corporal. In March 1916, the Australians sailed to Marseille to join the fighting in France. Their first major engagement was at the village of Pozières in July and August. This was a shocking introduction to the warfare of the Western Front. By the time the 2nd Division, of which the 17th Battalion was part, was relieved in early August, about half of its men had been killed or wounded. Maynard and his unit remained in reserve at Pozières for the rest of August. The battalion was rested in the north near the relatively quiet Belgian border, but then moved back to the Somme sector. In late November, the 17th Battalion was holding the front line near Mametz when they came under German artillery fire. Maynard was badly wounded in the leg and face. In the wet, muddy conditions, he had also developed trench foot. He was evacuated to a hospital in England, where he recuperated for several months. Maynard had recovered sufficiently by March to begin training in England at the army camps in Salisbury Plain. He was promoted to the rank of sergeant and helped train Australian and English troops for most of the year. He returned to the 17th Battalion in Belgium after it had endured the nightmarish Third Battle of Ypres in early October. Soon afterwards, he fell ill and returned to hospital in England. He spent time recovering in England and France until May 1918. returning to his unit in France, Maynard took part in the beginning of the Allied march to victory on the Western Front. In July, the 17th Battalion was in a reserve role at the Battle of Hamel, the first in a series of victories against the Germans that involved Australian troops. In early August, the men of the 17th Battalion prepared to recapture the French city of Amiens and strategic points around the Somme River. The Allies began their offensive on the 8th of August 1918 and succeeded in capturing their objectives. The German losses were so high that the German commander called it the Black Day for the German army in this war. During the fighting in Amiens, Maynard was killed in action. He was 35 years old. Leopold Maynard is buried at Villers-Bretonneux Military Cemetery in France, alongside more than 2,000 Commonwealth servicemen of the First World War. The Maynard family lost 2 sons in the war. Maynard's younger brother, Private Cedric Maynard, had enlisted in the AIF in 1915 and was killed in action in March 1917 near Bapaume in France. Sergeant Leopold Maynard is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, amongst almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Sergeant Leopold Maynard, who gave his life for us, for our freedom, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening.